So this is the advanced GUI or UI talk. I will probably say GUI a lot during this presentation, but we're calling it the UI. My name is Philip Cosgrave. I'm one of the programmers that's been working on the UI system since I started at Unity 2 years ago. I guess just by a show of hands, who went home yesterday and downloaded the 4.6 beta and started playing around with it? Not as many as I was expecting. Out of you people, who actually enjoyed playing around with it? And for the people that didn't raise their hands, didn't like it? Okay. Good luck with that. I don't know how the Wi-Fi is going to hold up. So basically, I'm just going to. There's a lot of different components that we added in 4.6 to make the GUI work. So I'm going to try to touch on all the different systems. Hopefully, I have time. I'm not exactly sure. But I'm going to start off with the basic components. So our Rect Transforms, the canvas, which draws everything, the different controls that we're shipping with. I'm going to lightly touch on the layout system. And then we have some miscellaneous controls that we've added as well, just as helper functions. I'll then touch on the event system, which is what will actually allow buttons to receive clicks, hover, enter, all those sort of things. I'll then very quickly touch on Unity events. Basically, you can think of them as C# delegates. I'll then go into a bit of an example, building a customized control that we're not shipping with originally, but not to say that we won't eventually add it as a package. And then we'll do some Q&A, and hopefully there's plenty of time for that. So as Lucas mentioned yesterday so kindly, we replaced the transform component with a Rect Transform component. What this component is, it finds a rect that the UI will render with. You still have your position as a vector 3, so your x, y, and z, but now you also have a width and height. Something else that was added to the component, or the Rect Transform, is your anchors. These are defined by what I guess was deemed the power flower. That was new to me yesterday. With the different anchor presets, obviously you have top left, top right, middle left, middle right, middle middle. And if you actually notice, in the drop-down, you also get options to set the pivot and position. So I'll just quickly flip over to Unity and show you a couple of these different things more so in terms of using it than just a slide, because slides don't show you actually anything. So with this just simple image drawn in the canvas, by default, the anchor's set to 0.5, 0.5 for the min and the max, which specifies right in the middle of the parent component. From there, the position x and y is actually the offset that the element will draw at from the pivot. So if I were to change this element to be top left, you'll see that the power flower has actually moved to the top left corner, but the actual element has stayed the same. You might have noticed that the position x and position y now have actually changed, though. If I reset these to 0, my element is now off screen, mainly because that, I guess I set the scene up poorly, but 0.5, 0.5. The pivot was in the bottom right-hand corner. So as I was saying, the anchors also allow you to set the pivot and the position at the same time, saving your designers from having to do exactly what I just did of repositioning at the same time. So if I were to now hold, what are they, Shift and Alt, and I can send it to the top right corner, you'll notice that it's actually being drawn exactly where you expected in the game view. And that's because the pivot is now in the top right corner of the widget. My power flower is in the top right corner, and position for X and Y are 0. Along with the power flower, you can also have a custom anchor. And what this is it specifies a percentage in the parent transform, or the parent Rect transform, on where it's actually going to start the offset. So if your parent is 100 pixels wide, and you have your left side at min of 0.25, that means that your component is actually going to start at 25 pixels in from that parent component. From there, that's where you would add your offset of your left and right. So if I set that to 10, it's now 10 pixels off the 25% of my parent's width. And to dive into the Rect Transform a little bit more, we have these 2 buttons right now. And can you see them? Yeah. They're buttons. They will be changed to icons later in the beta. But what they are they're the blueprint mode and the raw mode. What the blueprint mode does, and as a nice little tooltip tells you, it shows you our transform tool without the need, or without scale and rotation. So if I were to rotate actually, let's set the pivot to something else. You want to try that one?
Yeah. Unplug it.
Let's see if Windows plays nicely with Thunderbolt. Anybody know Windows didn't crash? Okay. Let's just put my pivot back to 0. Actually, let's put it at 0 and 0. 0 and 0, why not? So actually, let's take that off. So my pivot is now down in this bottom corner. If I were to rotate the item or the element and set the max to 1, which it still is, as indicated by this half of the power flower, if I start changing the game view size, you'll notice that the UI element is stretching in an odd way. And your designers may not understand what's going on. They go into blueprint mode, you'll actually notice that the tool is now drawn as if it was not rotated. So now when the game view changes, you can see, oh, yes, this element was actually rotated poorly. Let's fix that. What the raw mode does, let's reset all this stuff back to 0. Let's just make that 1. What the raw mode does is it allows you to edit in that inspector without the values being applied. So if I were to say I want this element 10 pixels from one side, 10 from the other side, the width to be 10 and the height to be 10, these values actually do change. And then I would to go and change the anchors to be 0, 0, 0, or sorry, that should have been 1 and 1. You'll notice that my element stays exactly where it is. Let's undo the anchor elements. But if I put it in raw mode, as soon as I say 0 on the X, you'll notice that the element actually stretches. So it's not resetting to compensate for the anchor change. I should be able to do it on the Y as well. I did notice a bug with doing the max, but you'll notice that the element is now actually full screen. So I've done it all in the inspector, and it's made it easier without having to redefine the left, top, right, and bottom. Let's turn that off so I don't forget later. The next things we've added is our canvas components. Our canvases all have the exact same backends for batching, but they behave differently on how they get drawn. Our screen space overlay canvas gets drawn directly to screen. Means you can't put anything on top of it, you can't put lighting effects on it, you can't do camera effects on it, or anything like that. It's also, we've disabled the 2D sorting layer because, again, you can't put 2D in front or intermix these two systems. On the other hand, the screen space camera, the screen space camera canvas now also takes a render camera. What this is this is the only camera that will render this canvas. If you don't have a camera specified, like in my picture, it defaults back to the overlay mode. But as soon as you assign a camera, the Rect Transform of that canvas will then snap to the view frustum of the assigned camera. The plane distance is actually the distance from the near clipping plane, or actually the position of the camera. So that distance has to be within the near and far clipping planes of the camera, otherwise your canvas isn't going to render. But the nice thing with the camera is you still get the screen space coordinates, so it's 0 to 1, or 0 to width in your screen space or height. And you also can do perspective, so you can start rotating your canvases and have the nice perspective. So all your camera settings are now assigned to the canvas as well. You change the field of view, your perspective's obviously going to change. You can also now specify the sorting layer and sorting order if you want to start interleaving different canvases with 2D elements. World Space Canvas is actually fairly similar to the screen space, except for you now get control over the Rect Transform. What that means is it's not driven by anything, where the first two are actually hard set values that you can't change. But the other difference with World Space Canvas is the camera is now an event camera. This ties in closely to the event system, and what this means is if you don't have a camera assigned, it might just use the main camera. But if you want a different camera to send the events to this canvas, you actually have to specify an event camera. If you start switching between the screen space camera and the world space canvas, the camera will stay the same. It's the same reference, it's just used in a different way. So along with 4.6, we have a bunch of different controls. We have an image and text, which I classify as renderable controls, meaning that these are the only items that actually do any rendering. They tell the canvas, here's my material that I'm using, here's my vertices, here's where I'm positioned, where the other controls like button, slider, scroll bar, toggle, input field, I think I'm missing one, toggle. No, it's there. They are more interaction and selectable controls. So if I take a quick look at the button script, and I'm sorry, I didn't switch this project to be nicer. Let's see if I can zoom. Our button class actually derives from what we call selectable. And this gives you the navigations. I think I actually say that in a later slide as well. Yeah. So this actually gives you your different transitions. So by default, we have a color tint. So when you have a normal color, when you hover over the element, it will change to a highlighted color. When you press the element, it will change to the pressed color. Your other options are sprite swap, meaning you just assign a different 2D sprite to it. And then the last one is actually tying into the mechanism animation, which I'll kind of go into a little bit on the demo side. The other thing selectable gives you is your navigation controls. Now, what I mean by navigation controls is if I were to hit the up arrow key on a keyboard, you expect it to jump to a different tab or a different input field. Well, sorry, not input field, but different graphic. Usually in like web applications, tab will jump between fields. But also on like consoles and different platforms, you are just using a joystick, and in that case, you want to actually have control over where everything is going. So let's open up my controls. So if I select one of these buttons and the visualize is on, you'll see in the scene view what the different transitions are. So for this button here, if I were to hit the left arrow key or joystick left, it would actually move and select this button. If I were to hit the up button, it would select this one. Now that's just our automatic selection based on positions. You can also specify, I don't want any navigations for this control. I only want this control to respond to horizontal navigations, vertical navigations, or you can explicitly set what to do on the different controls. So if, for instance, I was on this button, I set it to explicit, I can have, I don't know, right go to that top button. Doesn't necessarily make sense, but for your game, it might. So the next part is our layout components. The vertical, horizontal layout group, the grid layout group are all controllable elements, so they will handle controlling the direct children of themselves and position them in either a horizontal, vertical position or a grid layout. Our content size fitter, let's go previous. Content size fitter will allow you to do things like if you enter a whole bunch of text and you start typing, it can resize your Rect Transform to fit the size of the text. And the layout element is actually used in conjunction with the two different group types, so you can specify exactly what you want this particular element to look like. Otherwise, the groups just use their default values, and it goes from there. So I'll just quickly show you our grid example that we have. It's just an alphabetical keyboard, which probably isn't the best keyboard, but it doesn't matter. If I were to start changing the screen size, you'll notice that the keyboard is still in a grid formation, but now the elements are automatically being repositioned below each other and shrinking a little bit. So our miscellaneous components are our canvas group, our shadow and outline, and Rect Transform, or scroll rect, sorry. I more just want to show you that these are there more than anything, so you can go and explore them yourselves a bit. It's just, if you don't know they're there, you're never going to go look for them. The group you want to think of as basically grouping elements together, so you can set the alpha and the interactability on them. The shadow and outline does exactly as you think. It duplicates the vertices behind and offsets them in some direction. And the scroll rect will allow you to move a Rect Transform around and have it be elastic and stuff like that. So our event system is broken down into different areas. We have modules, Raycasters, handlers, EventData. I'm actually running a bit behind. So our modules are our standalone input module and our touch input module. When you create a canvas, you're automatically going to get another event system game object in your scene. It will have the event system script on it and both these modules as well. So if you want your game to respond to standalone input, so that would be your keyboard, your mice, your joystick. This module has to be there. It uses the axis controls that are defined in Unity. Our touch input module is what's going to handle all your touch dot finger position and all your different finger touches on mobile. We have different Raycasters that all actually will play nicely with each other. So our graphic Raycaster has to be attached to a canvas. Every canvas that you want to receive events also has to have a Raycaster assigned to it. And it will go through depth first and figure out what's below the mouse and then send the event to that object. The physics and physics 2D Raycaster do exactly as you probably think. It's a physics.raycast into the scene, so any objects with a collider on them can actually respond to the exact same events that the graphics do. What those events are, are all these different handlers. Now, I've removed the I in front of these and the handler at the back of all of these, just because it's easier to read. But all these handlers are actually defined as interfaces. So if you wanted to listen to one of these events in one of your scripts, you would just extend and derive your class from iPointer enter handler. You can then define the method in your class, and when we do our processing, we'll see if that interface actually exists or not. If it's there, we'll call it. For each of these handlers, we actually pass along a whole bunch of event data. We have our base event data, which is usually just sent to our selectable item. If I select something, there's no information I really can pass you that you'll care about. So we just say what system actually called it, and you get to say whether you use the selected event or not. If you pass back false, it'll then go and try to pass it to the next element. Our pointer event data, I've only listed 3 here. There's a lot more data that's actually sent along. Some extra data that you get is what was the game object that was hovered? What was the game object that was pressed on? How long between clicks? There's so much data in there, I don't even remember it all. And then we have our access event data, which is going to be used for our on-move call. And it has direction of up, down, left, and right. But it also has a vector 2. So on your joystick, if you're pressing up and left, you will actually get that vector as well. So currently, we don't process all 8 directions. We probably will in the future, so we'll add it. But you have the data there for you, so you can do whatever you want. And then Unity events. They actually reside in the Unity Engine.events namespace. Now, I should also mention that the event system lives in Unity Engine.event system, and the UI lives in Unity Engine.ui. So if you can't find the components in your scripts, make sure you're actually using the right namespaces. And our Unity events are assignable both at edit time and runtime, so they are script or serializable data. And I actually have a little example script, which I think is where did it go? So this is just the very basic form of our Unity events. It's defined as just Unity event. You can actually have it extend to up to 4 different parameter types. But just as a quick example, I left it as empty. On start, I'm just assigning a listener to it, and then I'm invoking the listener. But to also show just how easy it is in the inspector, we have a property drawer that will draw the Unity events for you. So all I did to assign this is I dragged the main camera in, gives you a drop-down of what function you want to call, separated by the components that are attached to the object you dragged in. And we can go events, and then my inspector event. If I were to hit play on this, the console would print both inside my inspector action and inside my action, because I defined the event twice. So that was a very quick rundown of all the different systems. Like I said, there's a lot to them, and there's a lot more. But what I want to show you next is kind of using these different systems to actually build a component of your own, extend one of our components, and so on. So basically, I'm going to do a simple toggle component, like an iOS toggle, if like turn off your Wi-Fi or something in the settings, hook up an animation to it, add drag handling to it, add a Unity event, and then prevent clicking on an empty space. And I'll show you what I mean by that once we get there. So I go into part 1. Don't save. So there's my component that I built. I'm not going to actually rebuild it for you. It's not hard. It probably took 5 minutes, but it's kind of boring, and I know I'd mess it up somehow. So if I just take a look at it, it's just simple parent game object, which has my control on it, an image, which is rendering the background. It has on and off text, and the handle, which I'm actually going to slide or move back and forth. So if I hit play on this, you'll see that it just snaps back and forth, kind of how you expect a toggle to behave. We'll take a look at the script for this, just as a quick example. So it's using the event system, which means I can derive from iPointerClick and iSubmit handler. Submit handler is there, so if I hit the Enter key and it's already selected, it will perform its action. If you don't want it to respond to those type of events, don't have to. Yeah, I just override, or don't override the functions, but I define the functions in the class and call internal toggle. And currently, I'm just playing the effect, and I'm moving the anchor position from one side to the other side. If I take a look at part 2, because that's a very basic thing. It doesn't look all that nice. It just snaps from here to here, and obviously you want it to look pretty and be more functional. So in example 2, I've actually added an animator component to the toggle. So if I take a look at my animator, I go from any state to move right and any state to move left based on my different triggers. You probably know Mechanism better than I do, so I didn't get too complex on this. But I'm doing the exact same thing in my animation as I did in code, but now I don't actually have to code or know the values. So I'm just going from 0, 0.5 to 0.45 and 0.95. And that you'll actually notice in the game view, it now nicely slides back and forth. To take a quick look at the change in the code there, all I'm doing now is I have the animator component, and I call the set trigger, and it will slide based on whether I'm on or off. So to actually see it in action, it now nicely slides back and forth. Go into part 3. What did I add in part 3? Sorry, one sec. I kind of forgot what I had. Part 3 is I added a drag handler. So if you actually look on your device as you slide back and forth, once you hit one of the edges, it automatically will slide to that position for you. It's not just a tap component. So if I play this, I can now click and drag, and as soon as I'm outside my Rect Transform, I'm sliding and setting the value. In code, I've now also derived from iDrag handler. I've added an onDrag function, and I'm getting what I classified as the normalized value. It's probably a poor name for it, but I convert the mouse screen space position to a local position, and then I convert that to a 0 to 1 space based upon the pivot. So if my pivot's on the right-hand side, it will still work. Let me just clap some of these down. So the next thing I want to do is just hook up a quick Unity event to it, because having to have a component reference this toggle to find out what its current value is and then use it is kind of tedious. I'd rather just know, hey, his value changed, I can do something with it. So here I've just added a quick text, just anchored to the top, and it will actually receive an event when I click on it. I think I actually left it, so I have to assign it. Yep. So you can hit the little plus button in the inspector. Just as a FYI, you can add as many of these as you like and reorder them, I think. But I can just drag in the current value text, And I want to set the current value and set text. And now when it actually gets called, it sets the text based on that. If I take a look at the code for that, to actually have the bool parameter included, you have to have your own event type. So here I've created a toggle changed event, made it serializable, so Unity can actually serialize it and derive from Unity event with a bool parameter. I can then just use that as a property or variable of my class, and it will pick up and serialize properly. Then when I actually set the value, I make sure that it's actually there. I've assigned it as a new toggle change, but in case I didn't, or who knows, something goes wrong, make sure it's valid, and then I actually just invoke with the bool parameter that I want to pass. The last part is if you actually notice, I don't know if you might be able to see, but on here, the Rect Transform actually has a whole bunch of dead space before the actual graphic that's being drawn. So currently, if I click on the shadow, which would be this area in here and on this edge, it will respond to the event. Chances are that's not what you want. You probably want to block that event or just allow something else to pick up the event, because you're technically not over what you'd consider a renderable part of the graphic. So if I switch over to part 5, the event system is extensible to the point that you can have it block and deny events. So if I take a look at part 5, actually. So to do this, I've added a new Rect event mask and derived from iCanvas raycast filter. What this means is before the graphic is actually considered the proper graphic that's under the mouse, the event system will look for this interface. If it is defined, it will call every one of these interfaces on that graphic or game object and ask, at this screen position, with this event camera, is this click or whatever valid? So in this case, I actually just take a border. So I come up 10 pixels, I come in 10 pixels, and I say, if my local position of my mouse is less than the rect min plus the border, so that would be off the left, or it's greater than the max minus the border width, then you can just return false. If I take a look at that in the actual component, it's just defined like that. It's not anything terribly complex. It's just a nice to have feature. One limitation of this at the moment is where we'd like to take it is having it be like an alpha mask, because doing it based on a rect is a little bit harder. What happens if your button's a circle? You want only the circle portion to be clickable. You don't want the rect outside the circle to be clickable. That can't be done at the moment because when we pack the sprites, the texture that is created is not a readable texture. So there's just no way to get the alpha back out. It's a limitation that 2D kind of gave us that we'd like to fix, but we'll get there eventually. So that's basically just a quick rundown. I wanted to give lots of time for a Q&A because last time I did this presentation, there was questions, not necessarily because I went too quickly, although looking at my time, I think I might have today, but more so, there's just so many different parts of the system that you probably have questions, and it's a perfect time to answer them. So I'd like to invite Rune up to the stage. He's another one of our graphics developers, or our GUI developers. All 4 of us are actually here at the moment, but we all kind of have more specialized knowledge in different areas. I don't exactly know where the other two of them went. They kind of left us to it. But between the two of us, I think we know most things, so we should be able to answer any questions. There's 2 mics at the front, so if you could come down and use the mic so people elsewhere can hear. And I'll try to do it in order. Yeah, pick it up, it should be on. I think you got there first.
Hello.
Oh,
So what's the best way to create a table with multiple objects, like your table view and table data source, and not create a lot of garbage?
That would be more a layout question for you, which is exactly why I
I'm-
brought you.
Can you repeat it? I didn't get it.
So, you know, your table view for iOS, right? So you can create like a table data source and create reusable cells. So imagine I want to create a table with lots of items. It's like hundreds of them. And I want to scroll through them, but I want to reuse views, like canvases, and just not create a view for an object for every entry. What's going to be the best way to do that?
Oh, you mean like a scroll rect?
Yeah. So if you want to scroll view, we have something called scroller for where you can have content rect inside it, where you can have things scrolling. You can arrange the elements inside the scroll view either manually using the Rect Transform tools in the scene view and inspector, or you can use one of the layout groups in order to use an automated layout, for example, a horizontal group or vertical group or a grid layout. And that can be used to automatically lay out the elements if you want it that way. I'm not sure if that
But in
answers
terms
the
of like
question.
how iOS does it, where as soon as it's off the bottom of the page, it starts reusing elements.
Yeah.
We don't support that at the moment. The system's extensible enough that you can add it. It's something that I personally have considered an important feature to add, because as soon as you get up to hundreds of elements in one of these scroll views, but only 4 of them are visible, you need to be able to start reusing instead of having 100 elements in your scene.
Okay, another one. And as far as I understand, this UI system is not available for editor scripts, right?
No, the new UI system is for runtime only. The GUI for the editor, for example, Asset Store tools, extensions, still use the same GUI system as before.
Okay, thank you.
Go over to the other side.
Yeah, so we saw that you had the input controls in there, or input field controls. So for devices, I'm assuming you're supporting the soft key input for that type of thing.
Yep.
Are you guys supporting the variant types of keyboards, like numeric only, for example? Additionally, are you guys adding support for, say, shifting the screen if the soft key is going to cover whatever the input field is? And if you don't have those things, can we have them?
So in terms of supporting the different keyboard types, yes. There is a bug in the input field where it's not actually exposing the different types in the inspector. In terms of whether the soft keyboard will cover the input fields, are we handling that? At the moment, no.
Okay.
Will we handle it? Yes. It's just, we want to get it out the door before we start doing all these nice,
Sure, as long as it's on the
nicer
roadmap,
things.
that's the
But
question.
we will add it, or probably more specifically, I'll add it.
Well, thank you.
yeah, I haven't had a chance to play with it, so sorry if this is in there, but when you were showing all the different anchor and resizing stuff, where are you guys on 9-slice support?
We completely support 9-slice. So for whatever reason, my computer doesn't like this scene. But the button that I showed, that's actually, the button here is actually a 9-slice component. So if I take a look at my image, it's a GUI sprite. And there's actually a 9-slice option in the sprite inspector that the 2D system has. So we
Great,
support
thanks.
it.
Hi. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of performance side, particularly memory? Like we've definitely had issues on NGUI where at runtime it's doing a lot of allocations. Like, does this system do allocations C# side or?
We've actually spent a lot of time optimizing it. So there's a lot of calls where even right now, get component returns you a list, and that allocates memory. So internally, and I don't know when we're going to do the rest of the APIs, but
So-
we've made it a zero allocation call to improve exactly that.
Yes. So a number of new API points in general, not just for the UI, but across the scripting API, have been added in 4.5. I don't remember, maybe some we even added earlier. But for example, for returning components without allocating, and we are committed to doing that more and more also in later versions. The UI system has been optimized for doing no allocations in the vast majority of cases, so there shouldn't be a lot of that.
Even when we do all our batching, we try to reuse batches where possible, so we're not allocating at all, where possible.
So if you have animation on your UI elements, does that sort of generally not allocate?
Yeah, the animation shouldn't actually allocate anything for the UI. Obviously, having the animation, it's going to take, depending on what you're doing, it will be a little bit of a performance hit because we have to rebatch all the time to figure out what's overlapping, what can we batch together. There are plans to heavily improve our batching, but as it stands right now, we're a lot better at batching than what Unity by default could do for us, even in the 2D system.
Okay, thanks.
Hello.
Hey.
I wasn't sure when you showed this, if you were making a mobile game,
Yes.
and you want to also in the editor be able to register mouse clicks as a finger, do you have to do two separate paths for that, or?
No, so actually on the, where did it go? If I look at my event system, there's actually allow activation on mobile device and allow activation on standalone. So if you just have a mobile game with your touch input module, it will fake touches with the mouse for you.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
So the sample UI that you guys have already put together looks really good, and I'd like to quickly attach that to a scene that I already have developed, and I'm wondering how you would do that, and then also, are there other sample UIs, I haven't seen any yet, that, or are they going to be developed later, that you would also be able to choose from and then attach to a scene and then go from there?
Like a whole UI HUD that's been defined. By the way, Tim Cooper, one of the other developers on the UI system.
So the Learn team is currently rewriting all of the sample assets we've got to use the new UI system. So they've got things coming down the pipe like on-screen joystick controls and that kind of thing in the new UI system. And the aim of those projects is so you can just take these things and put them in your applications so that you can just essentially put the UIs in however you feel and use these controls that have been written. Moving forward, the Learn team, all their UI stuff is going to be in the new UI system, and so you'll be able to take whatever they do and use that. And anything we do will probably be sort of just releasing to show you how we do it, and you can feel free to take it and use it how you want.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm just curious how the concept of GUI skins fits into the new UI system.
It doesn't really.
Are you referring to the old UI skins we have, or?
Well, the general concept of being able to define a look that you then apply in lots of different places.
So at the moment, we don't have support for that. It's something we will probably look at some stage, and we've got other things we want to address first before we move on to that. But there's already a package on the asset store that someone put up and tweeted about yesterday that you can use to skin your new UIs. So that was surprising for me and for us as well.
with the UI system, we've been focusing on making it very flexible how things work. So, for example, a button could be just an image, just text, text and image, or many different text fields. It can be any combination of game objects. So that makes it tricky to do very generable and reusable skinning that works across different games, because we don't know what control in your game looks like and what it consists of. But using the same, with the same plans that we have going forward for supporting SD and HD assets, swapping out images using that system, I believe that should be possible to use the same to also swap out images for other purposes than supporting different resolutions and actually swapping the skins that way.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, with the new UI system, whether you'll be able to use the layout to control positioning of 3D mesh objects as well, including position and or scale size. Is that possible?
The Rect Transforms can be used on any game object, but only, at the moment, only the UI elements actually respect the size, rendering inside the size of the Rect. So it can be used now for positioning, but not for controlling scaling of size.
Okay. One other small question. Is the input system extensible such that you could have other virtual cursors, for example, controlled by like a game controller or other sensors?
So what we've done is we've written the input modules to be quite extendable. And when we release the source code, you'll see more about that. I actually posted a link on the forum somewhere to some of the source code for this already, because people were asking questions. And essentially what you can do is you can define your own virtual input system and extend it however you want, and just essentially inject events into the engine that way, however you feel. We sort of went with this model because right now, with the sort of the redesign that the core team is doing on the input, if you saw the talk earlier, which they talked about and mentioned, we're not really too sure exactly what it's going to be. Like on our team, we've had to talk to them, and we're going to make it support the new UI system, obviously. But we wanted something that was flexible and we could easily adapt when they start making changes, and we could move across, which is why we've used an extendable module for this.
Thank you.
Two quick questions. First one, do you guys support Windows 7 touch events or Tuyo or any other? Are those kind of baked into the touch input system? Or?
So do you mean Windows 7 or Windows 8?
Actually both.
Both. So we do support Windows 7 and Windows 8 touch events, at least as far as I'm aware.
I know we support Windows 8 because it's just the same as the Metro and Windows Phone touch events. Yeah. Honestly, I don't have a clue about Windows 7. It may not.
Does the Windows touch events normally just use the input touches that we support in Unity, or is it some custom API that you've written and extended?
I actually haven't played around with it in Unity.
Yeah, so in Unity we have a touch API essentially, which is where we read touch events from, and our touch input module uses that. So we're essentially leveraging the existing touch API in Unity. So if the Windows 8 team or Windows 7 team went and implemented the touch interface properly, then we support it. If not, then you need to raise a bug and we'll poke them and get them to implement that for us.
You can always ask at the hands-on lab and they'll be able to point you, the core team will be able to point you to whether it was done or not.
Cool. The other question was, is there a way to mask out elements? For instance, say this visible element will only draw on screen over when this rectangle is overlaid or not overlaid?
Yeah, so if you take a look at the scroll rectx, I didn't necessarily show it to them in the presentation, but you'll see that this element on the very right-hand side is actually being clipped out. And this area here is defined as a maskable area.
So if we select this, you'll see that this is the area representing the elements here outside of the view. And then above them we have a scroll view which uses a mask component to do masking.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering, what's going on underneath the hood with the overlap in functionality between the transform component and the Rect Transform component? I've noticed, like in script, that even a game object that has a Rect Transform, you can still access its transform and set things like position and rotation and scale, and also like its parenting, which you can also do on the Rect Transform. I was wondering, is it good to only use one of the two? Does it matter which one we access in script?
So a Rect Transform inherits from transform, so it is technically a transform and has the same functionality as the transform, just some extra functionality as well. The way to think of it is that the position of a normal transform corresponds to the pivot in a Rect Transform.
On your slide, you showed several events about dragging and also clicking. I was curious if you support any events for multi-touch. So can I pinch and zoom on elements? Can I rotate them?
So at the moment, these are basically the list of events we support, but the event system we have is actually also user extendable. We'll probably end up adding support further down the track for things like pinch and multi-touch. But until we do, you can extend these systems and add them yourself and send custom pinch events or custom rotate events, depending on what the finger input is. And there was actually already a forum on the threads, a thread on the forums in the development section about adding multi-touch support, where I pointed someone in a direction that should help them.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the anchoring, which uses the parent object of whatever you're trying to change the anchoring for. Is there a way to set a different object that you want to anchor to, or to extend in such a way that you could set a custom object to anchor to?
The way the Rect Transform works is that it's always relative to the parent. If you want to do more special or custom logic for controlling where Rect should be, you can implement scripts basically that control the Rect Transform of your game object based on anything you like. We have a concept called driven properties, which means that a script can drive some properties of a Rect Transform and make them non-editable, so that there's a clear distinction between which properties of a Rect Transform are driven by a script and which ones are free to be modified manually in the scene or in Spectre.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as you'll actually see for like a screen space camera and screen space overlay canvas, our Rect Transforms are actually being driven. So that's what it would look like.
So you kind of skipped over the text and font stuff. So I was kind of wondering if you could speak about like UTF, what you support for like Asian characters, and maybe even like gradient overlays or fonts and shadows and stuff like that for text elements.
Yeah, so our text is actually using TTFs and Unity's dynamic font system.
So that's documented online already. It's existed since, in its current state, since about Unity 4.3. We made some slight modifications and extensions to it for 4.6, but it's currently, we want to rewrite it essentially because we're not happy with its support for all the like nice typographic layout and things we want to do. But what we can quickly show you here is, let's have a look. So we have a scene. It's probably not a good one. Where's it? Just something with a text? Here we are. So here we have a text element on the button. And as you can see, it has a shadow script. We can enable and disable the shadow on the button. And you can see it appear and disappear a little bit there. And you can change the effect distance. What we've essentially done is we've decoupled text effects from effects in general. So any graphic element you have in your UI, you can add an effects script to. And this is also another functionality you can extend. Out of the box we provide two. We provide a shadow and an outline. And you can just add a shadow or an outline to any graphical element in your UI. To do things like gradients, I would recommend using vertex colors and things like that. And what the shadow script does internally is it essentially just duplicates the object or the vertices in the background. But if you want to do a gradient, you could just modify the vertex colors before they get passed through. So they essentially modify the data before it's passed to rendering.
What if I wanted,
Mike on the right-hand side.
What if I wanted to apply a texture to the the font?
In what way? Because
Like an overlay. Like an overlay across the word.
Oh, okay. Well, you would do that by changing the material on the font itself. Oh, sorry, on the rendering element. So in this case, you see we have a material here.
Yeah, so both text and image, you can actually override the material that gets used to render that particular graphic.
Awesome. Just one other quick follow-up. Squash and stretch for things that don't fit inside the text box. Is that supported?
So we have a horizontal overflow and vertical overflow. So horizontal, you can wrap or just let it overflow. And for vertical.
Yeah, we don't squash or stretch, but you can enable best fit. And what that will do is we'll scale down the text to fit in the area.
Awesome. Thank you.
Does your event system support bubbling and tunneling of events?
So at the moment, the way the event system works is we've designed it in a way that we feel is what we want for how a UI behaves. And by that I mean when you click on a button, for example, the events won't be passed through to the elements behind it, so we don't bubble the events up the chain or pass them through to the elements behind. It can be changed and extended to do that if you have a custom use case for it, but we don't do that in our current implementation.
Right. And is there a way to tell if the user is over any 2D UI element?
Yes, on the event system we have a call where you can query if you're over a 2D element. But actually it's a call to query if you're over any event system managed object.
Right. Thank you.
Hi. For your new event for like drag and mouse events like that, or finger events like that, can you use those outside of a canvas? And if not, would you make a game inside of a canvas that, where you had 2D gameplay inside there?
You can use all the events outside of the canvas.
Oh, okay.
It's basically we're rolling out a C# event system that supports these things, and we support things like 2D raycasting, 3D raycasting, graphics raycasting, and in the example use, like all of the UI canvas stuff uses graphics. But if we actually go back to this scene here, you'll see your scene is modified, but if you can't quite see it, but the color of the bunny is changing a little bit and starts listening to a 3D click.
Thanks.
You can also use the canvas to make a game if you want. We did a prototype with that, and it uses the batching and everything internally.
Hey there, I was wondering what kind of built-in support or kind of best practices you might have for navigation that includes submenus. So like clicking on a button pops up a confirmation yes/no box, and how that interacts with the navigation system, basically doing inside and back.
The navigation is a bit simplistic at the moment. What you would probably do is that you could give focus to one of the elements inside the window and make sure that none of them point outside of the window by setting the transitions manually.
Okay, and then one other quick question. Do you support bitmap fonts, or is it all dynamic fonts?
Yes.
Yes.
We do support bitmap fonts. This one here is actually a text element rendered using an SDF text from a bitmap font. The support is relatively rudimentary, like we can't rescale them or anything like that. So if you make a bitmap font, we only support the default resolution you've generated the font in.
And just something that was in NGUI, do you support emotes inside of bitmap fonts?
Not currently. It's something we will be adding when we rework the text.
Thank you.
Hi, for things like the grids and masking, do you support nesting those?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, quick question about the best fits for the text. Do you have the ability or plan to have the ability to link elements together? For example, if you have 3 buttons and one of the labels happen to be longer due to localization, can you actually apply the scale between all 3 buttons so you don't have 3 texts that are different sizes, so they're all essentially the same?
Not currently. We don't have dependencies between elements like this. What you could do, though, is you could write an extension to the text component and have a list of notifiers. That wouldn't be too hard to do because we know when best fit has been used. So you could say get the size from the best fit that was generated and then pass it on to the chain, to the children elements or the referenced elements.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, so we actually just have time for one more question.
It's a quick one. Do you eventually foresee better support for right-to-left languages?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so you know, we will all be at the hands-on lab starting at 1:30. So any other additional questions, you can come there.